Okay, good morning, everyone. Today is Monday, December 21st, and I'm going to call this special meeting to order. Unfortunately, Duke Deneen could not be with us today, so Deborah Ritchie, me, will be running the meeting today. So we'll move on to the second item, which is the strategic planning.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for accommodating this meeting. I thought it was particularly important, as did you, as a group, to continue the good work that's been done and to try and give a wee bit of dedicated time. And I know it's hard to separate probably the dedicated time to this, to Christmas shopping and everything else in between. But thank you for your time today. It's great to see this start to come to fruition after basically a year's worth of work. So today we'll have a good opportunity for the board to review, make comments, revise, and just look at the next steps forward with this. So again, I thank you for this morning, particularly getting up early to actually share some comments about it. And with that, I'll invite Richard from Virginia. Richard's going to lead us through the document remotely. Richard, I don't see you, but oh yeah, I do see you. Yeah, right there. Good morning to you, Richard. Thank you for joining us.
Good morning, and it's a pleasure to be with you all. It has been a long process, and it is exciting to be coming towards the end of this. I just want a couple process slides here. What we're trying to do today is solicit feedback on a completed but still yet draft strategic plan, capture any edits and suggestions along the way today. We're going to take careful notes of your feedback, suggestions, try to keep crafting it, getting it finalized, and where possible, reach any agreement. So if there are things that you're ready to sign off on, we'll capture those and go on. This is the visual representation of the process that the superintendent shared with you before we began the strategic planning process. This was the kind of vision for how this would unfold. And we've, though the timeline changed directly as a response to COVID, we've basically followed this process. So early on, there was an engagement with the board to make sure that the board laid out the parameters of the strategic planning, clarified outcomes process, clarified the relationship between the board and a steering committee, and also gave advice and counsel on how to form that steering committee. Then we did create a strategic planning steering committee that had representation of the board, but also had representation of staff, faculty, administration, community, and students. And that group worked over the better part of the last year to take stock of the district's work. That's in the next part, the conduct needs assessment, to examine the superintendent's 90-day entry plan results, to collect some additional feedback in terms of focus groups, look at any artifacts and data that were available, basically just to take a solid look at how things are going in Darien and think about what that might mean. Then the steering committee went about a kind of systematic process for reviewing mission, vision, values, for starting to create goal areas, a small number that the district might pursue in the next 5 years, and made sure that a parallel process with the portrait of the graduate that was going on in the high schools was in sync and lined up. And then the second to last ray here at the bottom is what's been going on for the last several weeks, where based upon the guidance of the steering committee and work that had been done up to that point that the board had already reviewed, we, the kind of team in Darien looked at each of these goal areas, and we put together some experts inside the district, and they came up with kind of smaller grain lines of work that would have to happen in order to achieve the goal areas that were articulated. So what are the strategies, and what do we know has to happen? And then ultimately we're in this last part of the process. We're in a process where we want you to make sure that your fingerprints are on this, that you understand everything that's in this, and that you're in agreement. Because ultimately, from the very beginning, you were the policy-making body and the body that would okay and approve this proposal or this draft, and the steering committee was advisory to that. So that's where we are. I just thought it was useful to take a few minutes to remind us of the process, because it has been arrested a couple of times because of COVID. So now, just in terms of what we'd like to do going forward for the rest of this special meeting of the board is, and this is my proposal to you, and I'll just check in with you to see if this is okay. I suggest that we walk through part by part and hear your comments. If you have specific suggestions, we'll try to capture those. If you are, as a body, in agreement on those, we're going to try to capture those agreements and we'll move on past them. And if there are places where we can't quite resolve, where there are lines of suggestion, but there might need to be some more thinking, we'll capture the suggestions, we'll take them offline, and we'll bring back another revised.
Point of information.
Yes.
Ms. Ritchie, isn't this really a first read? I don't see anything on for action. I'm not sure what we're going to approve or come to agreement on today.
We're having a discussion on this, Steve. So I think it's important that the board have input before we take any action. No, there is no action, but it is a review of the process. And I think it makes sense to give suggestions, nothing that's to be voted on, but I think we should have a good, robust discussion about this document.
That's fine. I just heard, coming to agreement and moving on to things where people agree today. I didn't think that was the purpose of this meeting. So that's what I'm looking to clarify.
I mean, Dr. Lemons can clarify by his word use of agreement, but I think a formal agreement wouldn't be moved by the board until we get the final document. So I think he just means we're discussing and hopefully coming to a consensus before we formalize the document.
Yes, my apologies for introducing any confusion there. I wasn't under the impression that you were moving and making formal votes on this today either. I just assumed that as we were going through, if it was clear that everyone was in agreement in particular parts, then when we came back at a later time, we'd already know that there seems to be some consensus on those parts, and we can focus on the parts where we really need to weigh in and resolve different opinions if there are.
Are you okay, Dave?
I mean, honestly, no, but I guess we'll see how it goes.
And that's to say that when we see the first action item on this, it doesn't mean it will be a final version of the document. So we can anticipate if the board wants to have further discussion as it becomes an action item. Doesn't mean the first time we see it, we're going to finalize it. But I do think we need to have a robust discussion so that down the line, when we get that document, we're along in the process and we're not starting from scratch. So I think people should feel free to give their input, suggestions at this point.
Yeah, and I honestly, I thought this was kind of the process of turning over to the board this work product, and then the board would take it and start working with it and adopting it, and having that robust discussion. The idea that we're going to, dust off any language to the point of having it at a final draft, then to move to action. I didn't realize that was the purpose of this meeting, that we're going to be at that much of having a refined finished product. I really thought this was our first look at what had happened over the past year and taking it away and starting our work.
I think to some degree it can be something the same, like just looking for just contextual context back from how certain things resonate and so on and so forth. And I think we'll probably get to the process you're talking about, Mr. Brown.
Thank you.
So I'm going to come out of this. And the last thing I will say on that point is that maybe I'm just using the wrong words, but that is what I was assuming today was. That we're not trying to reach conclusion or anything like that. We're just trying to begin to capture your thinking in the process. So I'm going to bring up or let me just pause there to see if there are any other comments about process.
I see.
Yeah, thank you. Richard, would you mind clarifying for us 2 points about the process. One, the actual scope of this document. So if we come into something that isn't in here, who does this document affect? Is it just the district? Is it the board? What's that relationship, so that we understand where, where work that we might see being there or not being there, whether it would belong on this document. And then the second thing, if you would talk to, is in our process of going through this, we're looking to make sure that the mission, the vision, and the values also align with the work that's set up in the strategic plan. And how, as board members, do you think that we best can do that crosswalk? So some of the values in particular we see represented throughout the plan, and others are not mentioned by name, for example, and that might be okay. But I just would love some advice from you about how you would crosswalk it as a board member at this stage.
Do you mind if I ask, could you clarify your first question? I'm not sure I fully understand what you're asking.
Sure. So there's, for example, some work that we had set up going into the previous year that we had planned for the 2020-21 school year that got put off. It doesn't necessarily show up in the strategic plan, or there could be work that we're thinking about doing. So two examples of that would be some of the work that Rich Rudel had defined about looking at his back office and how that functions. Another example of that is we currently have a goal around our media and outreach strategy, which we could do some work on this year, but those kinds of goals usually are multiple years in duration. I don't necessarily see them mentioned here, but those goals do belong with the district in some ways, but belong with the board in other places. Or maybe somebody out here has a policy goal, or something else that might have a heavy board. So I'm just curious about, as we go through this document, what is the scope of the work? Is this just for things that the administration does? Can you help us with that? Sometimes we get into a little bit of who does the document represent?
So I think typically the strategic plans like this in districts across Connecticut tend to focus primarily on the work of administration, faculty, and staff. They might also have there might be some goals that are policy in nature or have some policy implications. I think it's also true that strategic plans don't hold everything that districts do, because it would be impossible to identify and to articulate all of the work that's going on. So I think that they represent some sense of, here are some new areas of focus in order to drive improvement forward. But I think that it probably makes sense for the superintendent to weigh in on how much of the work that's not articulated ought to get pushed in, and are there design principles that might help us make decisions about what gets included in this document itself and what gets captured somewhere else.
Dad, sorry, I don't know how to raise hands on this.
That's okay.
I happen to be on. I think we're confusing two things, just to kind of streamline for today. The goal, at least as I understand it, the goals that we have listed today are not necessarily all of our board goals. They're the goals as they relate to the strategic plan, which is what this meeting is warned for. And I would agree with Dr. Lemons that if the board decides on other goals, annual, biannual, or going forward, we can always do that. But I think today's meeting and how it's warned is specifically to goals as they relate to implementing the strategic plan. So I think if we veer too far out of that, we're going to be a little bit all over the place. But Jill, I think that there's still probably good board goals that then can be incorporated, and how we do that, it will be with however we define the strategic plan. So I think when we talk board goals versus board like goals listed in here, they're two separate things.
Right, and the strategic plan is the blueprint, and we work off of that blueprint and feed other goals using that blueprint. So I would defer to Dr. Abbey at this point.
Yeah, the only thing I would say is that, to Jill's point, that we've got some of the goals that I would bring back for board consideration annually will feed from this, because you don't have the time, processes, or otherwise to do, lots of other sort of systems with it. However, it doesn't mean to say there's something's not in this that's not a priority or won't get done either administratively or through board work together. That's not the case. And the only other thing I'd mention, Jill, is that the communication here is directly commented in goal number 5. So that one was very consciously included there. So there are things that will be done administratively. There are things that will be done through other board goals, but the board goals generally will stem from these goals as we try to do the work every year.
Does that answer your questions, Jill?
Yes, I think it's important that we as a board understand how these documents interrelate, that there's not 2 separate processes. One is the strategic plan and the other is goals. There could be work that is not captured in the strategic plan, but I do think that's sort of the point of planning is to set up your work over time, not to have 2 separate processes. So I think as a board, before we sign off on this document, we need to be very clear about what the purpose of this deliverable, and then what anything subsidiary that comes from this would or would not look like, so that we're clear about how this gets used and defines our work and the work of the admin. Thank you.
I just find a comment. I do think that's important because this is going to guide our work collectively, yours as a board, mine as the administrative team. So anyway, yes.
Okay, unless there are other questions, I'm going to share the screen, bring up the document. I believe you already have copies of it, but that way we'll have a common visual reference and I can capture notes as we walk through.
And just Dr. Lemons, as we go through the document, how would you like the discussion? Do you want us to discuss each point, or would you like to wait and do goal A1 or goal 1 first and discuss it? Or do you want to do the individual sub goals? How would you, just so I know how to proceed forward?
I think we ought to go section by section. So the first section would be the 3 kind of foundational documents: vision, mission, core value, which the board has seen before on a couple of occasions, but it'd be worth to have some conversation. And then we could have, I would suggest, conversation about each of those goal areas, one which would include any of the sub goal areas. And what I'll try to do mostly is to capture the thinking. I think if you would help keep the conversation going and make sure that everyone's called upon, and I will try to capture any of the ideas that are emerging that might need to be documented and brought into another version.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Richard, are we allowed to make edits or tweaks? Or is that what you're looking for from us?
Katie, that's Katie.
Sorry, Katie, I'm back. Sorry.
I would say yes, absolutely. If we're getting into, if it's really small,
Yeah.
just in terms of the amount of time that you have, what I would suggest is write it down and send it to us. But if it's real, make sure that we have it and we get those tweaks. But if it's something that kind of changes the nature of what we're talking about or is substantive, that's the kind of work we ought to focus on today, since it's your first cut through.
Okay. How do we send it to you? Sorry.
You can send an email. Well, how about through the superintendent?
I'm sorry. So we should go through Duke, through the chair, and then he can take all the comments and forward them on.
Thanks, Deb.
Great. So this is the working draft that we have. We have an articulation of the fantastic folks who are on the strategic planning committee. A lot of credit to them. And then we have three statements that you have seen before, and it makes sense to pause and not gloss over those. But to Jill's point, these become anchors for the rest of the work. And we should see some alignment. You would hope that the goals that you're pursuing are linked to what you see as your mission, and what you're trying to accomplish as your vision, and are consistent with your statements of value. So, and I think you have these in front of you, and we'll to have some conversation if there are points of question or conversation around mission, vision, or core values.
Does anyone have any comments, questions on those 3 things? Those 3 items? I can't see people, so you'll just.
So I guess this goes back a little bit to process. Like, I think there's so much information here. How do you want us to start? I mean, so my, I think we're all going to have reactions to mission and vision. I don't know. Tell us how you want to start, or do you just kind of want our raw thoughts, Richard?
I would love just to hear your raw thoughts.
Okay, well then clearly I have some. So Deb, if you don't mind, I'll keep going. I guess what kind of the vision reads a little awkward to me, and I don't mean that grammatically. I think part of what I'm concerned about is we've lost a little bit of the schools exist for children idea. And I don't know how anyone else feels, or if they feel that that's incorporated in other places. But I like the idea that we're preparing students, but when our vision included, or our mission included that schools exist for children, it wasn't just that we were prepping students, they had agency in and of themselves with schools. And I do, as I read through this document, I felt like that was missing a little bit. And I know that this is kind of to inform the adults on how to proceed, but I think it's a little dangerous to lose that student agency. I don't know, maybe the best way to get it in there, but I'd be open to everybody's thoughts.
No, I do agree with that, Tara. And again, I agree with you that I don't have the phraseology that would work in that particular section, but I do think that schools exist for children is one of our core values, and I don't want that to get lost. And if it's reflected somehow, but maybe it needs to be reflected in a more obvious way. And I don't know how other board members feel.
Chime in for a second. So Richard and Jill, as we went through this in our groups, we sort of, I think, netted out, and correct me if I'm wrong, that our vision statement was going to be sort of overarching, broader, bigger, and our mission was sort of going to illuminate the vision and sort of get more into the details. So I think we really need to look at them together. To your point, Tara, do vision and mission together sort of capture what you're talking about? And if not, is mission not the place to sort of maybe tweak a little then? Or is it both? I'm just throwing that out there.
So where I would see both, and yes, clearly the vision talks about preparing all students. I think where the group over time was leaning in terms of the student aspect was the first line of inspiring a love of learning for students, basically, right? Without putting the word students in there. I think that's the part of the mission that really got a lot of discussion, because that's also difficult to measure, but there was a lot of consensus on basically what you're saying, Tara, that there was an aspect of this that we didn't want to lose, and that's kind of how they captured it in the opening phrase.
So I guess, and maybe just because linguistically these things matter to me, and so maybe it's overly nerdy of me, I just feel like everything we're doing are the adults having action, and I don't see the agency of kids, right? So we're inspiring a love of learning, we're preparing, versus schools exist for children. There's a part of that the schools innately, children have a home there, or, I don't mean home, I'm sorry, I'll keep drinking coffee and I'll come up with a better word. But I do think that all of this seems very top down, and I'd love to get students in there somehow. It's just my opinion, and I think the 9 of us can talk about it, or you can all be reading it very differently than me. But I think schools exist for children really give children standing, and here children are always on the receiving. And that's the kind of the dichotomy. I'm trying to come up with a balance.
Would the use of the word students in the mission statement help reach that goal, Tara?
Maybe. I'm reading it. Do you have any suggestions on where you'd put it?
Well, I mean, listen, they're fine to me. I'm just trying to facilitate your thought, based on what you said. And, for students or inspiring students' love of learning, developing of critical think, just the use of the word somewhere in there.
I mean, just going off what Miss Auckland said, I mean, inspiring is kind of a weak verb. Developing stronger, but it's not that strong. We have innovative, modifying creators. I don't know why you need to I don't know how you have non-innovative creators. It seems like a strange modifier. I mean, we could spend an awful lot of time on this language, which is why I was trying to figure out what we're trying to do here in this meeting. Because I mean, this sentence alone could be a few hours of conversation.
Well, Dave, I heard you in the beginning. I think part of what we're doing is so many people have spent so many time on this. This is now the board, because at the end of the day, this will be ours. And that's
Right.
kind of the balance we've been looking to find. But I don't think it's a word choice thing that I'm after here. I think it's more that I'm just missing the idea of what do public schools really do, right? And actually, COVID, what we've been seeing is everyone has different ideas of what public schools do. And so what do the Darien public schools do for our children? And part of that is how do they relate directly to kids? So yes, we deliver work down, have expectations, and produce something, our portrait of the graduate at the end. But
Right.
Where do our students have agency? And maybe it can just be a thought. We don't have to like solve the problem now. If we can have that in the back of our heads as we go through this, but schools exist for children, to me, made children, tied schools and children. Here, this is all what we're doing.
And I think
that's okay.
I think exist is very key there, because it really forms how we act and everything. I think our role here should be more than just inspiring. And when you look at that, if your schools exist and everything you do is motivated to them, here, inspiring, what does that mean? You make somebody think about school a little bit. I don't know what that means, but there's a lot more action. There's a lot more to your word agency in schools exist for kids, and that puts a bigger burden on us. And I think our objective is to even inspire. So I think you're right. We do have a very strong, good statement in that schools exist for children. I'm not sure I'm seeing anything like that strength in this.
And obviously this is not a final version, so we can continue this. And as we get the document in early 2021, we can maybe try to formalize it a little bit more if there's going to be a change to it.
There are other places in the document where even under administrative action steps in terms of teaching and learning, where we have to define expectations for adults and also for our students, and also the whole vision of the graduate. But yeah, I give a comment.
I think because it's such a strong statement, schools exist for children, we don't want it buried in the document. I'm hearing that some on the board wouldn't want it buried in the document. I think it's something that maybe needs to come out in the mission and vision a little bit better.
I agree. And I think, like everything we've learned, not everyone's going to read through the core values and sort of the qualifying documents that sort of explain the work. I think Tara's right. I think, perhaps it's something that Richard and a couple people could go back and work on separately and bring back to the board. I don't know that, to Dave Brown's point, we need to spend all of our time now, but knowing that it's something we want to incorporate, perhaps we could get a subgroup to opine on it.
Yeah, and I would agree with that, Katie. And again, just to Ms. Ackman's point earlier, I mean, it's written a little strange. Who are compassionate and contributing. So does compassionate modify citizens, or contributing modifies compassion? I'm just not sure how this is really drafted. But I do think we have a gating question, which is this really a strong enough statement based on, I mean, it seems like a downgrade from what we had in a way.
So I agree with shutting down the conversation and moving it forward in a different way. But Richard, would you mind reminding everyone of just the purpose of a mission and a vision, just so we're all, again, on the same page, and how they tend to function today?
So thank you for the question. Traditionally, a mission statement describes the kind of what you see as the core function of the organization. This is our main business. And a vision statement tends to be that if everything is going perfectly, here's what we would see as a result. Maybe not in just because of what you accomplished through your mission, but it's the bigger aspirations you're trying to bring about, the bigger outcomes you're trying to bring about. And so you put those two together, you've got a statement that clearly anchors, this is what we do. Other people might do other things, but this is what we do. And here's the reason we do it in terms of pursuing the vision.
Can I just step in as a point of order? Right now, people are just sort of jumping in and throwing their ideas on the table, which is great, but it's causing, for me, I need to make sure that I'm acknowledging and calling on people. So if we could just raise hands or just say, hey, I know Dave Brown doesn't have video, but just do it in a more organized fashion rather than everybody. I just want to make sure everybody gets to speak and we're not all trying to speak at the same time. So thank you guys. Moving on.
Okay. Any other, this is fantastic. This is the kind of feedback we wanted to elicit. Are there any other reactions to mission, vision, and or core values?
I see Jill's hand.
Richard, the question I had asked is a series of questions I'll lump together, sorry, was as we go through the strat plan and the meat of it, how should we be thinking about the crosswalk with core values? So for example, where do we see innovation? How do we make sure that innovation exists in a meaningful way in the meat of what we've done in the document? You know, some of the values like wellness, I see very explicitly, but some of the others are less so. Collaboration certainly underpins a lot of things, but you know, as I just want to make sure that, excuse me, where work is needed, it exists in the strat plan, and how would you recommend that we think about that?
I do not have a scientific explanation for that. I think what you're actually doing is the model. So I would just ask that as we read through, that we keep coming back and we're crosswalking to these foundational documents and asking ourselves, does this thing that we are articulating perhaps in goal 3 or strategy 3, does it line up with who we want to be, what we say we do, and what we're trying to bring about?
So I also think it's probably worthwhile, Dr. Lemon, just to reiterate what the core values are. As I see them, they are beliefs and collective commitments that we're making and how we do the work. They're not exclusive from the expectations from the children, from our students. They will be shown in work with the graduate also, so these will roll over. But this is how we go about our work. So I just wanted to sort of like just name that.
You know, just trying to create a little bit of space so anybody who has reactions, even if you're not sure what you want to do with them, but if you want to raise questions or just react to these. And if not, we'll move on further into the document.
I don't see everybody, so if someone has a question, they just want to, is that Tara?
So Deb, it's Tara. I just have a question and how these get written. Are they in a rank order? Is it random? Do we do it alphabetically? Because I know it sounds silly, but I think it's important to, at least when we put these out, I assume all of these core values are equal, but I think that might be something we need to be clear on.
So Dr. Lemons, these core values are all equal, correct?
Yes, I think there was some thinking among the steering committee about order, but it wasn't scientific. It was just making, and there wasn't one comes before the other becomes for the other. So if there are suggestions of an order that makes sense, whether it's alphabetical or in some other approach, love to hear it.
Well, alphabetical is obviously the easiest way to go about it, but Dr.
So my only suggestion at the time when the committee was walking through it, the rest of them in the order was one thing, but the one that I would like to suggest go first is the one that is first. After that, the safety, physically, socially, emotionally, all of that, I think is always our first priority. But beyond that, they weren't ranked in any capacity, Tara.
Right. And I think this is Sarah, I'm going to jump in. I think that as we were creating these lists of core values, I think the committee felt, the advisory committee felt strongly that wellness was an overarching theme of everything. And that's why it was put at the top, but everything else was what Dr. Edley said was equal.
So then I would find some way to reflect that if the board has to decide if wellness is its top core value, and I have no objection to that. But then I would list the others. I know it sounds silly, but like as I read this, my first reaction is we have respect and civility at the bottom. And if we're talking about overall wellness, I think that that's a core component we want our kids to teach because that contributes to wellness. So I started to wonder, why is it at the bottom? And I just think then maybe you want to consider going alphabetical, like wellness is your umbrella and then going alphabetical or something. But right now it looks like there's a rank order as someone who's just reading the document. And I think that that's maybe problematic.
Well, it could cause confusion as to if there are some are priorities over others. So I think if wellness is the overarching core value and then the others come underneath in alphabetical order, I don't know how others feel. But I don't see any other hands raised, so we can take that and move forward from there.
Let's back up. So within the steering committee, after the needs assessment, there was quite a bit of discussion and work to identify a small number of priority areas. So trying to make sure that the district wasn't trying to accomplish everything in the world under the sun in the coming years. These came to be known as goal areas. They're broad statements of the things the district's going to work on. Underneath, there are strategies that were also articulated among the steering committee members. Then the actions, the second column, was with the additional thinking of administration and staff to try to say what would it really take to deliver on the strategy. So questions, reactions to goal area 1, which is the broad enterprise of enhancing teaching and learning, which has 3 strategies: developing a shared vision of teaching and learning, creating curricula that are designed to responsibly represent diverse perspectives as well as meet individual learning needs, and aligning job-embedded professional learning opportunities to support growth and development in identified areas. So questions, reactions.
My reaction, sorry to jump in, but my reaction to this particular goal area is there's a lot of meat here in terms of curriculum changes. And it jumped out to me that as you develop this goal was a thought that there should be a curriculum committee for the board to help navigate this process.
I'm not sure, Superintendent, do you remember whether there was a specific thought about an ongoing sitting committee?
Well, certainly the use of the PDAC committee was going to be involved there, and it sort of plays a dual role, but I'll ask Christopher if he's thinking of the same.
And PDAC is professional development. What does that stand for? And what type of committee? Is that a board committee or?
It's a staff committee, and it does for professional development and curriculum.
And it stands for professional development, and what's the E?
It's Professional Development and Evaluation Committee.
Okay.
The evaluation comes from, the idea is coupling professional development with the teacher evaluation plan. So those are the 2 major components of that committee.
And I'm just going to jump in, if I may, following Ms. Ritchie. The question here is, we do have some of these acronyms. We have different programs and action items. As we're sitting here not knowing what they are, it's kind of hard for us to evaluate. Again, back to why we should maybe take delivery and come back with questions and not get to anything today. But I would hope at least for an executive summary for any program or something here that's mentioned, because it's kind of hard to evaluate in the dark.
I see Jill.
Richard, in terms of, can you help me understand some of the alignment? So we set up, of course, core values for the district. And here we've got district principles of teaching and learning. A little later in the strategic plan, we have some values coming out of Portrait of a Graduate. I understand these are all important. This is all important work, but can you help me understand how these things align with one another?
So in an ideal world, you have a portrait of the graduate that's speaking to the quality of the person who's walking across the stage at graduation that is much more robust than a collection of course credits that they've accumulated over 4 years. I think that's the spirit of a portrait of the graduate.
Mm-hmm.
You would want that portrait of the graduate to have some alignment to what you stand for in your mission and vision. And we've been having conversations across these two working committees. And you would also hope that what's going on in the classroom is helping to get students to that outcome, so that the vision that begins to emerge for high quality teaching and learning and gets to starts to be formalized for the district is directly in alignment to your portrait of the graduate, and then also your vision and mission.
So what then are the inputs to the district principles on teaching and learning? Maybe that's a question for Alan, but how is that being determined?
So under 1A, and I'll let Chris talk to some of it if he wants, the idea there is that you would develop principles of teaching and learning that talk about guaranteed expectations for children under what the teacher's expectations would be, and also guaranteed experiences for children, what their expectations would be. That's what it typically looks like. I don't want to forecast the outcome of that committee completely, but that's what it would typically look like. Christopher, under his committee, under 1B, has talked about a formal review of the curriculum process, and they would articulate that. Just to get back to David's comments, that's what would come out of that, a formal process of curriculum review process. In there, it talks about including diversity as an aspect of the curriculum development and a review of it. So that type of thing. Chris, do you want to talk about any more of it, or?
I would just add that there's certainly an attempt for alignment within that goal, and starting with clearly defining principles of teaching and learning. The idea there would be that's such a broad teaching and learning it's a big statement. There's lots of research about what good teaching and learning is. So as a district, it's very helpful, and I would say essential, that when we're talking about what we mean by our principles, that we're using the same language to talk about that. And then that becomes a cornerstone to what our teacher evaluation plan is. So once we have that language identified, that would be 1A. Then we're creating curriculum that's reflective of that language through our revision process and an audit process. That's 1B. And then 1C, we're aligning our professional development to support those principles. It's really a language calibration, I would say.
I see Tara's hand.
Sorry. But to be clear, some of this we already do. What we're doing is codifying it, because I mean, we've seen so much curriculum alignment, so much documentation, and maybe we can improve it. I agree, Chris, it is, every year in education, there's new research and you have to stay dynamic and adaptive, but I just don't want anyone thinking that we don't currently adapt, have documents. I mean, Dr. De Silva talked about it all the time. Mr. Tranberg has talked about it in his crazy environment that he's come into. But I think we need to, just for anyone listening, it's not that we don't currently do curriculum review. It's not currently that we're not doing alignment. We're just looking at ways to codify it and do it even better.
And that's a good comment, Tara, because that runs through all of these goals where you have that same question, and certainly we're not suggesting that, and the idea just continues to improve, and I appreciate that. And this is also where annual goals, you'll see more specific annual goals to support these things.
Just if I may, following up on Ms. Auckland's comment, in terms of codifying some of that, and that we do a number of these things. I mean, I'm just looking at the statute 170-10-220E that says every school district shall, obligatory language there, establish a school district curriculum committee. And I think that Ms. Ritchie touched on this earlier. I think that has to be part of our discussion is where's our curriculum committee that the board's established and how does that fit in? I think that's gonna be a necessary part of reviewing that question and having that be something that exists and has an active part in working through these materials.
I mean, I'm sorry, Tara, it is common that Board of Eds do have curriculum committees. Not every Board of Ed has one, but I think if we're going to be doing a substantial amount of work on curriculum, the board should be considering something like that. Go ahead, Tara.
So this has come up many times throughout districts and even in our own, because we used to have a curriculum committee, and we do, and the board has heard curriculum as a committee of the whole. The board can decide to do something different, but Dave, that exact statute has been discussed at the board level. It's an important statute. New Canaan had a big discussion about it 2 years ago. We've had big discussions about it. But to be clear, we are in compliance with the board, with the statute. We work as a committee of the whole when it comes to curriculum. And if the board chooses to go a different route, that is, but that was considered a far more effective route than our prior curriculum committee, which existed prior to me even coming on the board. So in terms of is satisfying the statute, we currently do satisfy the statute.
And again, Tara, I'm not trying to say we're not doing anything. I'm just saying that that is the requirement. And if we're going to get into some heavy work here, I think that's the proper to do it. Whether we spin out a subcommittee or whether we do it as a whole, that's fine. But it does need to be dealt with at a curriculum level.
And I think that's for a discussion at another time. At this point, I think we should sort of steer back to what the document that we're looking at. And as we move along in the process down the road, if the board feels it's necessary to constitute a curriculum committee, we will have that discussion. But let's get back to the document we're looking at today. Thanks, guys. Any more on goal number 1? I see Jill's hand up.
This is probably really for Chris or Alan, but so under 1B, the develop this back to the curriculum, formalized curriculum review audit process. So we had, I think, a sort of an every couple of years iteration, and then we moved to a responsive curriculum model. Are you looking at reviewing what we have in place and coming up with a new model? Is that how I read that? I'd like to understand, please, what that language, what you're looking at and what your output is. Not a checklist, but is it a different model?
No, I would say it's still a responsive curriculum revision model, but in order to determine what is going to be revised, it would be against a tool to use and say, so we're looking at all of the units against the same standards for when we would revise and why. So again, it's just formalizing the process of it.
Thank you.
I see Jill again.
So this is also where I have a question about, it probably belongs in a couple of places, but about, some of the values. So here, we specifically call out looking at differentiation and looking at diverse social, cultural, and racial perspectives. Do we want to be looking at innovation, for example, throughout the district and taking a look at how well we score on that value as part of this process? Or collaboration?
So you're asking, does the board want to weave in that core value into this 1B? Sorry, you're muted.
Thank you. Yes, it could be, that's what I'm asking. I know some of that goes underneath the portrait of a graduate and a balanced definition of student success. So I'm also asking Richard and Alan in terms of how the document is constructed, whether or not some of that's already captured inside of the portrait of a graduate work. I just want to make sure that, we've taken the time to define those as core values, that we are making sure that we actually are upholding those values.
Jill, I think that there's I think that in the creation of those, there was the assumption that it would be that all these things would connect back together, but the fact that But I think it's definitely under the purview of the board to say, we need to call it out more explicitly if you feel it needs to be laid out there a little bit more overtly.
So I also see those values sort of like an umbrella for all of these goals. Those values under the umbrella touch on literally every goal, and goal number, I think 3, is particularly talks about those particular attributes and would be integrated in those attributes.
Anyone else have goal 1 comments, questions before we move on? Jill?
So the units of study with differentiated instructional plans, can you give us some context for what you mean by differentiated? I know that we certainly as a district have had a lot of conversations about differentiation, and it's a value in our parent community. So while this is a fairly specific action item, I think it's a value in the community. So I'd like to understand with a little more detail what the intent is there.
So the idea there would be in the learning plan portion of our curriculum document, there would be with intentionality, a place to show different ways that students may demonstrate learning of that standard. So not only in how it's assessed, but how teachers plan for that and how it's taught. So right now, I know we talk about differentiation in pretty general terms, but we want to make sure we're defining what the guaranteed experiences are and expectations related to those standards, and how we might provide different ways for students to show mastery of that learning.
Just to follow up on that, Chris, does that mean that we'll be looking at potentially more accelerated learning at the elementary and middle school level, or is it just using the same learning model that we have in place now? I know for parents that I talk to, some of them really would like to see more accelerated math, for instance, at the higher elementary level.
I would say it's not the intent to do that, but it certainly leaves the space to have those conversations. That what I learned from the strategic planning committee was that there was some desire to have those conversations, but that's not the work of how a curriculum template looks is not supposed to be the driver of that conversation.
Understood. Okay. Carol?
So I'm a little confused. I feel like what we're now doing is drilling down into like the to kind of the pedagogy of how we're doing this. I'm not sure that that's strategic plan level, especially as we're going through the goal. Because, you know, Chris, how you define differentiate, the board might say we want to make sure differentiation is defined, right? But how you define that, I don't know that any of the 9 of us up here have the skill to define differentiation. So I feel like we're now digging down really deep, almost into the professional educator territory rather than staying in the strategic plan territory.
And this actually, Tara, I think that's a great point. This came up quite a bit in strategic planning when we would kind of go into these areas very specifically, because people on the committee had some deep interest in some of these areas. So my comment, and this would be Richard or Dr. Adley to respond, was you want the strategic plan to provide the space for the district to do the work that it needs to do. It's not saying exactly what is being done, but we know what desires exist within the community. We know that as a learning organization, we need to be flexible, but at the same time, we want the strategic plan to shape the path in order to accomplish what that work is. So that's the language that I had used with my committee, because it did come up quite a bit in goal number 1.
Shirley, go ahead, Shirley.
Thank you. And I know we're not going into the granular, but I did want to address Ms. Ritchie's comment also. The notion of demonstrating how children learn and looking at differentiation would be for all learners. We're looking at learning differences as well as accelerated learning. So it would be all learners in our school.
Thanks, Shirley.
Thank you.
And I do think, Terry, you're right in the sense it does get down into the administrative part of it. So the idea of like enhancing teaching and learning over the 5 years with these sort of, those big major strategies, I mean, that's the big umbrella for me in terms of Mr. Superintendent, administrative team, collectively the board, is there evidence of us improving teaching and learning? This is some administrative stuff to try and get at some of it.
And you build on that.
And yes, and so yes, it's not just this. Right?
Understood. Can we move on to
Deb?
one? Or
No, Deb, got a question
Sure,
or
Dan.
comment? So going to 1B and kind of building on what Jill says, it seems like we're calling out the diverse social, cultural, and racial perspectives. But also not, to me, I also struggle with year 2, we're developing a formalized review, curriculum review, and year 1, we're just diversifying. So it feels like to me, we're going ready, aim, shoot, or ready, shoot, aim, and then in year 2, we're finally aiming and figuring out what we're aiming at. It seems backwards to me. And to Jill's point, I think it should be more than just racial, cultural perspectives and build on other parts of our core values there.
So I would say for tech, oh, sorry. Jill was on.
Oh, okay. Sorry, Jill. I was writing. Go ahead.
And one more question, kind of in the question of how things get represented. So picking up on Shirley's point, there often is work in special education that is a bit specialized and doesn't necessarily fall easily in the grander edicts of a strategic plan. It would be captured, but how, for example, if we're looking at, which we have been, developing our behavioral response, and that was actually SRBI and special education. But when we have things that are like that, where you have a degree of specificity, how are you incorporating that within the plan? Because again, it may not rise to that high level, but the work would still be happening. So where do we see it?
Shirley? Go ahead, Shirley.
I think, Jill, where you'd see it is in the PD. You would see it in training teachers, all teachers, general and special education teachers, to be able to look at modalities and ways of instruction. So you see that under PD. Also in curriculum development, as you go into different learning communities, you would look at how to take any adaptive literature you might need, or to use technology to really support the same kind of standard for all students, but being able to adapt it to a level they can access.
Can we move on to goal 2? Okay, Dr. Lemons.
Thank you. So goal 2 focused on culture, fostering a culture that promotes wellness, diversity, and inclusion. There were a few strategies for this, and then obviously some action strategies: creating a caring school climate that promotes wellness, engaging stakeholders in the practice of embracing diversity, equity, and inclusion, and ensuring district values are operationalized across all schools. Let's see. I'm sorry, I skipped into 3 there. So I was moving past. So it's those 2 strategies for fostering culture, creating a caring school climate, and then engaging stakeholders in the practice of embracing diversity, equity, inclusion. These 2 areas came out of the steering committee, and the actions again come from a group of educators in the system trying to figure out how would we formalize those strategies into actions. Reactions, questions, comments?
Jill?
Under 2A, you have the exploratory committee to examine the district's practices of grading, grade reporting, and course placement and leveling. I understand it as written, but what is the purpose of that? Are we looking to change how those work, or are we looking to understand their impact on students?
I would say it has to be a bit of both. For it to appear, it's because in the committee, it came up as a concern in different areas. So that assumption's there, but I think we would want to mine a little bit more data to make sure that we're moving appropriately. And then make changes if it's deemed necessary there. But this also does tie back to those earlier comments that you made, Jill, trying to represent some of that work that was coming clearly out of the committee.
I had a question for Mr. Lamons, if I may. There were some questions asked by some community members regarding Connecticut Center for School Change, which offers on its website, among services, section social justice and equity. There was previously our core belief section, since removed from the website, but some of the language that remains seems to echo some of the language we have in 2B. And I'm just trying to understand, how did the perspective of your organization, what is that generally, and how does that fit into what this plan is here?
I appreciate the question, Mr. Brown. The Connecticut Center for School Change provides a broad battery of capacity building services as they partner with districts. Equity and social justice is one of those. And in terms of the work that we were doing with Darien, we were here as facilitators of strategic planning. So the content of all of these areas come directly from the steering committee, not from the Connecticut Center for School Change.
Sarah?
I will just say that this is something that the 27 of us talked about at length at multiple meetings, and that it was felt very strongly that this should be included and in here. So I don't think it came from Dr. Lemons.
Tara?
Hasn't the state also said the diversity curriculum must be included in the next few years? So this is actually in alignment with state mandates as well?
Correct, yes.
Yeah, we also have a district obligation to share how we are reducing social and racial isolation. Every year we're meant to do that. That's the whole idea of diversity. Came out from the kids, came out from the staff, came out from the community, came out through this process, and hence it was pulled out in this capacity. But I can assure you it's not influenced by Dr. Lemon's work, that this was organic. Came through the superintendent's report or plan also. So, and the kid, I mean, think about recently all the kids, right? But it's a very powerful message whenever you have our alum coming back and sharing some of these preparations that they would like to see experiences happen at the school system and so on. Not again that anything is not, but just to continue to work on that.
I just have a question on the phrase systemic inequities, because it can be used broadly or more specifically. So there are many different systemic inequities. So what were the main focus of, when you brought this phrase in, what was your main focus and thought process of the committee?
I can answer that, or
Whoever wants to answer that. Thank you.
I can jump in first. I would say talking about systemic inequities tends to be the language used when this work is being done. So it's systemic in the broadest sense. And you look big, and then you try to see how does our local system align or not with those larger systemic pieces, those larger systemic inequities, and that's what we use to address them. And it's through data that we would do that, not arbitrarily.
So essentially, it would look at what are the stories, what are the data, what are the practices that impact participation and outcomes for all students.
Across all mediums.
Yes.
In other words, across academics,
Correct.
extracurriculars, and that's so I'm trying to. It's going to be embedded in everything.
Correct.
Okay, that's where my questions. Tara, you have a question?
So I would just say, I mean, I think this is one place where the board could show real leadership. Like, this is a national conversation. This is a local conversation. It only behooves us to tackle this in the best way we can with the data we receive. And again, I think this is part of a strategic plan, right? You don't have all the actual what is going to happen on Tuesday with this, but as the issues face us, we're committed to tackling them, and we're committed to tackle them in a thoughtful way. So I think this is where, the Darien could be a real leader by really codifying that this is something that we are willing to examine to Deb's point, systematic inequities exist in lots of different ways and lots of different, with lots of different effects. And so this is one of the strongest parts of the document, I think, and I think the committee did a really nice job on it.
Jill?
I just wonder if we could broaden the language a little bit. I think that when I think about disability and the change from learning disability to learning difference, you know, I think it is important to take on things that need to be taken on, but I don't want us to only think about diversity, equity, and inclusion in terms of inequity. I think that there's kind of back to our original point of inspiring, whether or not everyone likes that language, and that's okay. There's a real positive aspect to embracing diversity and equity and inclusion, which doesn't show up as much in the action. And I think words matter. So I, particularly around this topic. So I would ask us just to broaden that language a little bit.
Jill, do you have a suggestion on what that would be?
Yeah, are you talking about within the language under strategy?
I'm under action. I think you're setting up a scope for establish a diversity and equity team to do what? I think addressing systemic inequities is there's a place for that. We'll have that discussion. But what else are they addressing? And really, I think what are you addressing from a
we can further discuss
opportunity?
Well, but Deb, sorry, Deb, to be clear, Jill, do you have a suggestion? Because I don't know that I'm fully grasping your request. And so if you have a suggestion for a phrase, just even if it's not one we stick with, it'll help me conceptualize what you're looking at.
Go ahead, Dr. Adley.
So maybe I can try and help if I'm trying to think I don't know if I'm thinking what Jill is thinking, but to me it's potentially, Jill, I'm trying to interpret what you're saying as it potentially could impact any groups of marginalized students in some capacity, right? It could be students with systemic learning needs. It could be our gay lesbian students. It could be just any group.
So that's
free and reduced meals. Are there any groups that are through the staff and through the discussion potentially are marginalized in some capacity? And we can do with the data, with the stories suggest that in some capacity we can be doing better for them or not. Am I capturing that right, Jill, or not?
Yes, I think that's part of it, Alan, and thank you for that. And maybe Shirley could help me a little bit here. But just I think that when we talk about marginalized students, we want to talk about them in a way that's real, but we also want to talk about them in a way that doesn't make them feel marginalized by our very speech.
Go ahead, Shirley. You don't have to raise your hand.
And I just want to say that we probably, when we go back and with all of the information and suggestions from the board members today, we probably can go back and look. In the goal area, I know it does under 2B, it does use the term embrace just to support what you're suggesting. But I think also in the goal area too, in the overarching goal, which is to foster a culture that promotes wellness. I think if that were to embrace wellness, diversity, inclusion, and I don't know if the word inclusion captures what you're trying to express. I'm wondering if that's the best word to describe it. So maybe inclusion is not the word. Maybe there's another way to look at that language also. But I think the two notions we can go back with of looking at embracing it and looking at what inclusion, a way to really capture that. Would that be helpful, Jill?
Yes, and I agree on both counts. Thank you.
Okay, John?
I think you guys just grasped it. There's academic inclusion and social inclusion, right? And that's kind of what you're trying to solidify there.
Yeah. So I'm a little worried that we're watering down this topic.
Okay.
I think that what we're looking at, and I hear Shirley what you're saying, inclusion, that's goal area 2. Jill, I think your concern, correct me if I'm wrong, was under 2B, the action item, right? The idea of systematic inequities, and that was your concern, the use of the language inequities. That's what I was kind of asking. Do you have a different term there that would capture what you're talking about?
I'm not asking for that language to be removed. I'm asking for an augmentation. So I want additional language so that we have also the positive. So that And again, I don't have a specific suggestion at this moment, but I think your concern perhaps is that I'm trying to remove it, and I'm not.
No, it's not my concern. That's why I originally asked, but then Alan jumped in. I just wanted to make sure, what were you looking to do, so we knew where we were looking to go.
Still, to be clear, you feel there should be additive language under this action item that addresses your concerns more completely?
Yes, I think the action sets up, I know there's a goal, but action appears to set up what work the committee needs to do. And again, I understand the addressing systemic inequities, but I think we've worked hard in special education to not just see people as marginalized or disabled. So I just want us to apply that same discipline here when we think about setting up the work of a committee.
So I think what Jill's asking for is some sort of seesaw balance between the idea of an inequity and inclusion of all learners as equals, right? Like, their learning difference doesn't inherently make them unequal. It's how we go about their education, right? And do we see their education as being equal and
educational inequities, right? It's educational inequities,
but that was my question. It was, what are we looking to do here? Because I think we went back up to goal area 2. So it's in 2B, we're looking to find that balance. I would agree with Mrs. McCammon that I wouldn't want to remove systematic inequities, because I don't think you want to water down the action, but I do understand the need to balance it so that people don't inherently feel unequal.
Right, that's a good point, and that's something that we can use and continue to build on as we develop the final document. Anything else on goal 2? Okay, shall we move on to number 3?
So goal area 3 focus, this in many ways was the through line for every conversation that we had with the steering committee. From the very first time that they came together, there was this want to make sure that there was real balance in how students were exposed to education, what was valued, what the desired outcomes would be. And so the goal area became articulated as developing a balanced definition of student success through the portrait of the graduates. It was an explicit place where they wanted to connect to that vision, that portrait that was coming out from the other committee. And we have 3 different strategies. 1, ensuring district values are operationalized across all schools. Some want to make sure that there was explicit ways for this work to cascade down into schools. Develop systems to measure, inform, and enhance implementation of the portrait of the graduate. So I think the group was saying it's not just enough to have a portrait of the graduate and hope that it happens, but there have to be systems in place to know whether you're making progress on that. And then lastly, we have to take stock of all of the work going on inside the district, curricularly, school programming, student life, to ensure a focus on service, citizenship, post-secondary opportunities, to have a broader stance of making sure that all those were funneling towards that balanced definition of student success. Obviously, a number of actions under each of these that the staff, administrators, staff have been working on. So reactions, questions, thoughts?
I had a brief question, and this may be something that doesn't fit here. So if where I don't belong, just let me know. This will be for later discussion. I apologize. I just am questioning, or have a question with the portrait of the graduate. And I know that's still a work in progress, and I haven't been part of it, so maybe this will come later. But when I see this, what I don't know is, I understand we want to modify our policies and practices. I don't understand how this feedback loop works with the practices, or with the portrait of the graduate, excuse me. In essence, right now, if we have grades and we have teachers and we have certain grades and certain SAT scores, you can, in theory, tie that back to the performance of the teaching. With the portrait of the graduate, how do we tie back the performance of the teachers in creating this portrait? So I just don't see how we're able to measure the impact of our teaching and of our curriculum and how that works into the end product. And again, that may be information that's coming, I apologize, but we were asked for just impact and or input and responses to these prompts. When I see Portrait of the Graduate, I just don't know how we measure the implementation of this from our staff and our curriculum.
I think that that's a really insightful question, and I can answer from the viewpoint of what other districts are doing. I think Darien's early into its journey with Portrait of the Graduate, as you were pointing out, Mr. Brown. What some districts have done is that they've created opportunities along the educational curriculum or continuum for students to demonstrate whether they've achieved mastery on whatever the skill, competency, or disposition. And they have created, for example, performance tasks that help to make students' thinking visible, and therefore the work of faculty and staff visible along that. And they create benchmarks. So here's where we expect students to demonstrate competency on this disposition that's laid out in the Portrait of the Graduate. And at this grade level, here's how much they will have changed. And they create a system of ways to monitor for that very purpose, because often districts don't have, when they first come up with a Portrait of the Graduate, they often don't have a way of monitoring, measuring, and really there is no feedback loop that fits in. The districts that I see making quite a bit of progress on this, and where they're leveraging Portraits of the Graduate quite artfully to push the work, is where they've created mechanisms for that feedback loop that you're asking about.
Dr. Lemons, just to build on that, can you give us some examples of what the benchmarks and demonstrated results could look like? So more in the end result, we don't know what the final Portrait of the Graduate is at this point, but what would those benchmarks look like for us to use as assessment?
So they tend to be in the form of performance tasks, where they're not pen and paper tests per se. There are students who are being asked to demonstrate something. For example, there might be a high school where one of the Portrait of the Graduate competencies and dispositions is the ability to collaborate in solving a problem. So at the 10th grade, this high school in the spring takes its science and social studies classes, puts them together, and puts them in the midst of an interdisciplinary project where students are randomly assigned to small groups. And over the course of the semester, they have to come up with a solution to the problem that's been formed to them. And they have to both solve the problem, but they also have to evolve as a group. And then at the end of the group, they have to reflect on what they've learned about collaborating. They have to demonstrate that they in fact collaborated. They have to evaluate their colleagues. I've seen that done, but there are lots of ways that that's happened. My son is in a district that does this. And one of the things that is they weave it into everything. One of the more provocative experiences I've had with my own son is where he said, "Hey, would you mind," and he was a mid-year freshman. He said, "Would you mind reviewing this essay for me?" I said, "What do you mean?" Because I was a little surprised, because my son doesn't usually bring me things and say, "Help me edit." And he had been charged, as all freshmen were charged at the end of first semester, to identify 2 competencies articulated in the Portrait of the Graduate, and to identify how they had learned and grown in those first 4 months of the school year. And he had written this empathic essay where he recognized he wasn't collaborating particularly well, and it had gotten in trouble, and he was becoming a deficit in his collaboration with his team. I'm sure he would love me telling everybody in Darien about this so that it's recorded. But it was this brilliant moment where he had to step back and reflect, not just on each individual course, but how was he growing as an individual. So there are lots of examples, but most of them tend to connect to some system of performance assessments that are woven organically into the school calendar.
So if I could just make a wee connection, and another example might be you could have culminating experiences at the end of each school level, grade 5, 8, and 12, that assesses how we do it moving forward. And then I just want to make a wee connection back to goal 1, as David said. So how do we, if we want students to be innovators and collaborators and problem solvers, back on teaching and learning, when we're defining teaching and learning, what the teachers are doing, what the curriculum is, you can't just do that without making sure those things are in place. So that's sort of the connection through it all.
Any other questions, comments on goal 3?
Excuse me.
I just had on 3C. In the end, you speak, leverage the values, this is under the action, leverage the values associated with the portrait of the graduate to enhance student service and citizenship. And I was curious if the committee had a vision for that or ideas about that, and how would we foster that in the Darien Public Schools?
I'll just be simple and say that is the work.
Okay. I mean, I have ideas, that's why.
That is the work.
Okay, great, thanks. So if we're done with, oh, Jill, sorry.
Just have a question for the board. If 3C, we don't have to answer it today, but that we do want to focus on service citizenship and post-secondary opportunities. I just think the board should reflect on that before signing off.
Tara?
So I agree, and it's not that I'm opposed to it. And I understand for some students specifically that their post-secondary opportunities are actually a really illegal, if not a moral mandate. But I think we need to really focus on what does post-secondary opportunities mean and what's, again, our role as a public school. I just think that that's a tricky but important conversation.
So you're looking more of a definition of what is meant by post-secondary opportunities?
No, what I'm looking for is if we go back to our vision statement right now as it is, it's we're preparing kids for the changing world tomorrow. So clearly we're saying we're preparing them to go out. Currently we talk about going out into society and be a participating member. Post-secondary opportunities, I think we need to know what that means, because that seems more narrow than going out into society and, preparing to be productive members. That post-secondary, I'd like, yeah, maybe it's a definition. Sorry, Deb, as I talk through it. But I agree with Jill, even though we might be coming at it at different ways. What does that mean? I want to be really careful that what we're not saying is, well, we're preparing all kids to go to college. That might not be all kids' college path. College might not be their path. Is it our job to prepare kids for trades? And that's a really laudable path, but is that our job? Like, I just think we need to know what we mean by that post-secondary opportunities versus what we have now, which is to go out to be participating members of society. And maybe those are the same things, but it feels a little more narrow to me, and that could be my own interpretation. I'm open to it, but I agree, at least with that one, with Mrs. McCammon, that we should press upon it a bit to understand what that means.
So perhaps Dr. Lemons or Dr. Adley can.
Yeah, it's not. I agree, Tara. It's not meant to be that narrow.
Okay.
Yeah, I think that the steering committee was hoping that it would be interpreted broadly, purposely, not post-secondary opportunities as necessarily collegiate.
Just to make
Yeah,
sure.
so I guess that's where I'm kind of stuck, is in terms of going out into society. Like, we have our military services contacts every year, trade organizations. I'm struggling, and again, maybe it's just me, maybe it's my issues with language, but I would like to explore it a little bit more.
So Shirley, did you want to add something?
I believe the intention also of the language, Tara, was also about exactly what Richard was saying. It was about the broadness of post-secondary. It's how do we prepare students for whatever their choices are after they graduate, or within that time. So it was, the broadness is, if it is post-secondary for college experience, if it is for work, if it is a year off, whatever the broadness is of what we're doing and how we prepare them to move on to whatever their choice of post-secondary experience is. It wasn't to limit, it was really to be that broad. So it may be vocational, it may be workforce, it may be time off, but it is really to look at the broadness of that as we look at our students.
So just a question to those who are on the committee, because I know we have several people, board members and staff. Did we look at that prior language we have of preparing students to go out into and be participating members of society, and how that differs from this current language? And was there anything meant different by it?
Jill.
I'll speak specifically to that phrase for a second, Tara. One of the drivers for that phrase was the cultural focus in this town on getting into college. And we were looking to broaden, again, part of that, broadening the definition of success and broadening the idea of what a post-secondary opportunity might be. This actually is one of those things that came from one of our students, and that student spoke very compellingly on that cultural focus within Darien. So if we haven't captured that, it's important to know that, because that was one of the drivers here specifically for that phrase. In terms of looking at, what we have, certainly we did look at the existing documentation as part of the process. But I can't speak to specifically why we didn't hold that language.
I can add just a little bit to that, Tara. There was, whenever we were talking about almost obligations, that it sounded like we were making kids feel like they have to contribute to society or to the world, so every time anything came up like that, it was very hard to reach consensus in our group as to what language to use, because it made it sound like, I think someone used the word intrinsic earlier. It's like trying to balance the intrinsic value of school. So students are positioned to do whatever they would like to do, instead of putting it on them of what was expected for them to do. I'm not sure if I'm saying that well, but that's, I just remember that coming up a lot.
I think you're saying it great. I'm not sure how that balances with citizenship, which inherently has an obligation to it, right? If you're a citizen, you have an obligation to your society. So I don't know. That, again, it's just me, one of 9 reading it, but I think the idea of part of the reason in my understanding of public schools is that we spend money and time and all this on our citizenry because we want kids to go out and chase their dreams, but there also is an obligation. Like, we educate people so that they are able to knowledgeably participate in the world around them. So, and so I think there is a bit of an obligation in there, or at least the intent of public schools was to have an informed citizenry, so that I don't know, Chris is laughing because I think he knows what I'm trying to say. But so I do think that sometimes in this world, obligation feels differently. But in terms of the context of a public school and citizenry, I think obligation is less of a burden to bear and more of a responsibility. And so I totally agree getting away from what Jill referenced. And I think she's saying the committee, you have an obligation to go out and do something for us. But there is a sort of responsibility in being a citizen, and a responsibility to an education for which the community has invested in. So I wouldn't want to veer too far from that. It's like I tell my own kids, it's not just whatever makes you happy. There's some responsibility in there as well. So if we could find a good way to balance that, or maybe tease that out a bit, I think that would be valuable.
So we can work on that as we get the document for the board. Anything else on goal 3? Okay, so we'll move on to number 4.
So goal area 4 was about making sure that you continue to support a world-class professional staff. I think that it was the belief that you have an amazing collection of educators who are within Darien Public Schools, and it was to make sure that you continue to grow your existing professionals, that you continue to recruit and retain the best professionals. So it was making sure that you're making the correlate investments in your professional capital so that they can deliver on everything that you've articulated before. So expanding the professional capacity of the staff is how it's stated as the goal area. The 4A, exploring ways to improve the district's professional learning culture and practices. So it's making sure to try to go at the actual working conditions and the ways of supporting teachers as they develop, ensuring that the professional learning system promotes continuous growth and support, and then attracting and retaining diverse educators. That emerged in the conversation relatively early in the discourse of the planning committee, and then evaluate and adapt current onboarding system to identify additional supports for teachers, including informal mentors. It's making sure as you do attract and hire that you have a robust system that brings them help in a healthy way into the community. And then obviously a number of actions that were articulated by the team in order to accomplish that. So questions, comments, feedback?
Dr. Lemons, could you just, the acronym RESC under 4C, could you just spell that out for me since I don't know what that stands for?
So the state set up a few decades ago regional education service centers, RESCs, to provide cross-district capacity and kind of to basically pool resources and be able to provide high quality resources to entire regions. I'm not sure which is your RESC, Dr. Adley.
Yeah, so we have basis that tip of May.
Okay. Okay, questions on goal 4? See anything. So I have one under 4B, under the action item, offer differentiated professional learning that allows teachers to balance personal professional learning needs and district initiatives. My question is, I didn't love that phrase, but aren't those two things tied together somewhat? I mean, they're not mutually exclusive, correct? I mean, those two goals should align.
Yes, the secret of that is in the sweet spot and the efficacy part where you feel it's not uncommon here or anywhere else, right, for a staff member to think what he or she needs versus what the district needs are different. And when you have that, inherently a staff member might not, or under those situations, feel as if their needs are particularly met. So we know in goal setting, and research would tell us that if the teacher and the staff member is invested in their own goals and those are supported, those are the best types of goals. So the secret is getting in the line and matching that to the teacher's goals as well. But you might think, well, in the curriculum, isn't that the case anyway? Well, it's just not quite as simple as that, but that's the sweet spot we're looking for.
Thank you. Anything else on goal 4? I don't see anything, so we will move on to goal 5.
So goal 5 in many ways is about systems development and making sure that there's an infrastructure for carrying out the work that you want to carry out. The goal was articulated by the steering committee as developing and enhancing systems to promote efficiency, coherence, and communication. Strategy 5A, establish effective and open lines of communication among all stakeholders. This was a big part of the discourse with the steering committee, making sure that communication was going well. Align districts' guiding documents and communications with its mission, vision, core values to foster coherence. I think the idea here was to make sure that once the board had adopted some version of those statements, that they began to penetrate through the organization. They began to show up, whether it was in reports or other documents that were being shared with the community.
John?
So when we talk about stakeholders in 5A, are we talking stakeholders within the school community, or is it beyond that within the broader Darien community?
If I remember accurately, and I'd ask anybody who was else, I think it was broad stakeholders. I think there was quite a bit of thought about communication within the community, within the education community, and within the entire town community.
Yeah,
so if we,
I remember.
So, oh, did you call?
I'm sorry, I was
Sorry.
just going to follow up. My
Go ahead.
bad. So if we could just clarify that a little further, or put a note for so we don't have to ask that question again, that'd be great.
So this goes back to some of what Mr. Brown was talking about. The goal area 5, based on the action items, it looks like the goal is actually developing and enhancing systems to promote efficiency and coherence in communication. We have and communication. But as written, it feels to me like efficiency is a goal, coherence is a goal, communication is a goal. And so, but the action items all seem to be around communication. So I'm just a question, because efficiency in and of itself as a goal here seems odd.
Jill, sorry.
Oh, sorry, Jill, go ahead.
By my recollection, when the goal initially started out, it was truly to look at efficiency, coherence, and communication. That this goal came from looking at kind of the entire district operational structure and where we might need to improve. So I kind of think to that end, some of the work that Rich was doing arguably could go underneath this goal in terms of rethinking how his finance back office functions. If we're going to continue with that work, based on how the goal is written, that's probably where I would put it. And I think it's big enough and important enough work that I would like to see it in a strat plan, because I think, but anyway, but to your point, I believe it was meant to be more expansive as it was originally drafted. What is here is communications, and that's fine. If we want to stay communications, then I think we could change the language of the goal.
So my question around it, why is brought it up, I think efficiency is a, left undefined is a very tricky goal for a school system, and it can be co-opted to mean too many things. So I would need to understand as if this is going to be a goal in and of itself broadly, because efficiency can go poorly in some areas and efficiency can be great in other areas. So if this is a standalone goal, especially coherence seems to go with communication, I understand that, but I would really need to understand efficiency before I would approve that as part of a strategic plan within a school system.
I would think the way it is written, this might actually be one of the, and I'm not suggesting we would do all this, but this might actually be one of the goal areas where you can literally, dare I say, drop out that word of efficiency, potentially. But I would need, need people to comment on that.
Well, I do agree with Tara, because it's in the title of the goal, but I don't know how it pertains to what the action is within the goal. And it seems to be, if we're going to be using efficiency, it might need to be separated out and into something.
Yeah, and to Jill's point, it was meant by the committee as a broader area for a goal. I'm willing to hear that, but I need to know what that means. This, at the moment, all I see is efficiency within communication. I'm totally happy with that because an efficiency is defined. But
we can change it to say efficient communication, but when you just use it as a standalone word, it becomes a very broadly defined term. So if we want communication, that's great, but.
So what I don't want to do is I don't want to, discount what the committee was after, but maybe Jill, Sarah, Katie, Shirley, someone can tell me what people meant by efficiency here.
When it was originally conceived, this had a lot to do with the transition from sort of more traditional kind of mom and pop-ish operational structures to more sophisticated operational structures. And that does comprise a lot of things. It's what your back office looks like in terms of what computer systems you use, how they integrate with others, how your, how your communication's a part of that, but how, data talks to data, how systems talk to systems. So not having, making sure that you're, it's why I'm asking questions about alignment. You wouldn't have values at the elementary school that didn't match values at the high school. We stripped out that last part and put it into a separate goal. So this really should be looking at sort of the work of the district, more central office, and how we are moving to a more sophisticated means of operation. Again, whether it's in systems and processes for the most part.
So Tara, to clarify, we were in different groups working on different goals. Shirley and I were on wellness, right? Shirley, we were on wellness.
Culture. Yep.
Culture, wellness, whatever came out. So it may be best to go back, Richard could go back to the group that was sort of teasing this area out. I don't think, Sarah, you were on it, right? No, and Jill, were you on this one, Jill? No.
No,
So
I wasn't.
that may be helpful for Richard to go back and sort of just, I know we have notes and stuff on that, just to see how it got where it is now.
So that would be kind of, as long as someone could help define that to me, because I hear what everyone's saying, but I can educate a child efficiently, but not well. I can communicate efficiently, but not well. And I do think if what we're looking at it as a more sophisticated system, which I would argue with the $100 million budget we should have at this point, right? And, or we should be working towards if we don't, then a more sophisticated business management system is a clearer goal than efficiency. Because efficiency, like I said, can be a positive or a negative. I can do a lot of things efficiently, but not well. And so without defining it, that term is problematic for me, and significantly so.
Yeah, I think it's good to see what the sort of genesis of their conversation was around this, to make sure we're capturing and understanding what it is they meant to put forward in this area.
Ms. Hockman, I hear you and I agree with efficiency. My only thought in response would be efficiency is not just from the school, even though this is our goals and objectives, but we need to be conscious of efficiency for the users of that communication. So there's sort of we need to keep that perspective in mind as we review this. So yeah, we could have a system that's efficiently sending out 100 emails to each parent each day. It's not going to do anything. So we need to keep in perspective that, it's the efficiency of the user as well.
Good, John.
Yeah, I just looked up the word efficient because some of Tara's comments got me thinking, and it's usually worded in a positive manner, to reach positive goals in a well-organized and competent way. So just so as we dig into some of this language, it's helpful to understand the true meaning behind it.
Yeah, true. And I think that's why it's so important that we define it and we define our intent with it, because I do think it's meant that way, but in practice, we could have someone saying, well, I can find a more efficient way for you to educate that child. But I think in some of our most complicated cases, that wouldn't achieve our other goals. So I just think we need to define it. So maybe it's going back to that group. Maybe it's as a board. What do we want to do with this word? Do we want to tease it out more? I understand Mrs. McCammon's point about a more sophisticated management system. I think that's in some ways more specific and powerful. But I'm uncomfortable not knowing what this word means in a strategic plan.
Hey, Sarah?
So I think, yeah. So I think that the part of the definition of it was more like streamlining. Like the information is in 5 different places currently. Can we streamline that to have it just be in one place so that whatever stakeholder is looking for whatever information, that it's easily found? And it just, I think that's the intent of the word efficiency rather than, the negative connotation.
So to Sarah, Mrs. Parent's choice and Mr. Brown's point, I understand those and agree with both of those as they relate to communication. And that's why I was asking, is efficiency a goal on its own, or is it related to communication? And I think that's where some of Mr. Brown's points earlier were powerful in how we word things. So efficiency in terms of communication, I'm very comfortable. That's not how this goal reads to me at the moment. It reads as a standalone. And I think that's what Jill's saying. Whatever this group was, efficiency in and of itself was standalone. So we should tease that out.
Right. And I think the intent of this group, and while I was not part of this group, just in their reporting back, was that it was efficiency in communication, not necessarily efficiency in other areas.
So Sarah and Jill have different perspectives, even being on the group, on what it meant. So Richard, maybe you could
all of this is incredibly useful feedback. What I will do is go back to all the notes from meetings and all the reporting out. I do think that at times the group was really focused on communications, and that probably ate up the majority of the thinking time. There was also some want for it to be not just communications, but I think that the emphasis on communications is why there's a little bit of tension. And are we talking just about communications? Are we talking about other systems, and how does efficiency play in? So we will do that. I'm wondering, given that there are 2 more areas that are not yet visited, but we're coming close to the end, would it be possible to get some guidance from the board in terms of how you want to proceed after today's session? Do you want Alan, Chris, and myself to go off and to incorporate what you've suggested or document it? Do you want a subcommittee of the board to review all of this feedback and bring it together? I guess I'm looking for some guidance of how you want to pursue the continued conversation and the continued work towards a refined document.
Well, the first question I would have is I'm sort of anticipating to get the board's pleasure if they want to continue for a wee bit, because you're doing good work here as far as I'm concerned. So that might be the first question. Unless I'm missing something about your availability, Richard, or not.
I am supposed to be going into another meeting, but I can stay on till 10:15.
Does the board want to continue the discussion to try to get through the rest of the goals?
I would say
I'd rather most of them next year.
get through the rest of them so that we have the feedback that Richard needs, or however we're going to attack it, how we're going to go forward. I think we try to jam through the next 2 goals.
Okay, so we can stay on until 10:15 if everybody's in agreement. I see no one that is opposed to that, so let's continue on.
But to Richard's point, I think we should be really clear on a next step.
Why don't we talk until 10:05, and then from 10:05 to 10:15 agree to next steps?
I like Jill's suggestion.
Yeah, and I think what the board needs to see the complete document and continue the discussion. So if there are things that need to be modified, we would get them modified. But let's continue on with goal 5. Or are we on goal 6? Are we done?
2 more goal areas left. Area 6 is about facilities, improving school facilities for student safety and access to learning. And this one is just a single strategy. Ensure that the configuration and condition of the district's physical facilities provide secure and supportive environments for teaching and learning. I think there was a want to make sure that both safety and teaching and learning were incorporated within this, and that there was work, and there was also an acknowledgement that there was work the board has been doing for a long time and is continuing to do in terms of facilities. So I'll come out of share mode in order to capture suggestions, feedback, questions.
I would just argue the first and the last point. I think the last point Mr. Lynch does very well and consistently. And then the first one, I think we may be a little beyond that. So I'm not sure whether those 2 need to remain.
And you're talking, Dave, about complete the architectural study to remove the portables and evaluate the school libraries?
Yeah, so I mean, we've done the architectural, I believe. So I think we're a little beyond architectural per se, looking at the scope of that word, and then exploring energy conservation practice. I think Mr. Lynch does that all day. So I'm not sure how that would be different than what we're already doing.
Well, I see Mike on. I mean, maybe Mike can speak to that.
I know Mike does many things all day, and I don't want to limit what he does, but I know that's one of the things.
I don't think he spends his whole day doing that, but I don't know if he wants to add anything there, but I guess the board can consider those points.
Did you want me to comment, Deb?
Sure. I mean, specifically.
I wanted to kind of explore the energy conservation practices, because I really haven't had that discussion with either Dr. Adley and Rich Rudel, or with the District Facilities Committee. So I
Okay, so
thought
just to be,
in this document, it might foster more dialogue.
so just to be clear, Mike, you requested, you would like this phrase to be contained in this goal.
Yes, please.
Thank you very much, Mr. Lynch.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments on goal 6? I don't see any. I just had a quick one on the measures, the completion of a 5-year building condition survey. So it's contained within years 1 to 5. Was there any thought to when the committee thought that should take place? It seems to be a very broad range of time. No.
I'm trying to see where you're looking.
Under measures, and it's on under the first, well, it's under goal 6, completion of the 5-year building condition survey.
I think what we tried to do here.
So is that sort of the master plan revisited? Is that what we're looking at?
Yes, in many ways, yes.
And was there any thought to, there seems to be a lot going on, when it would make sense to have that completed? Or is it just within that 1 to 5 years at any point?
Well,
we're thinking of the 2021
Okay.
-22 school year.
Okay, so maybe that's like year 1, 2. Okay, thank you. Thanks, Mike. Anything else on goal 6? So I guess we can move on to goal 7.
So goal 7, at one point, there was talk about this being linked with facilities, and the steering committee and the team ultimately extracted it from the facilities to put technology as a 7th goal in and of itself. So improving technology to support teaching and learning. Goal 7A, ensure strategic utilization of technology to enrich, support, and inspire teaching and learning. 7B, establish and manage a secure, reliable, and dynamic technology system for effective and efficient district operations. So the 7A is really that technology that's driving teaching and learning, and 7B is all of the technology that might be running in the back office, but the essential work that technology has to do to help promote an effective organization.
John?
I was just wondering how the committee thought about how this might overlap with goal area 5 when we were talking about efficiency in systems and that sort of thing.
So there where it says efficiencies, this was my group. That's more back office. I'm sorry, not even back office, but the network infrastructure, IT infrastructure. So you're looking to make sure that you have all of the hardware that you need, and the WANs and LANs and whatever we use today.
So that differs from data management systems in goal area 5, or I mean,
in goal area 5, well, it doesn't have to. It doesn't have to. Yes, I think really, I think we need a place for data management systems, and if we want to put it here in 7, that's fine. That's also an appropriate place. It just depends on what the driver is. If the driver is anyway.
I guess I would try to delineate or combine, if there is overlap. That would be my recommendation.
So
yeah.
I think I a couple thoughts on this, and John, thank you, because that's my exact point with efficiency. Efficiency in technology is probably a great spot to put efficiency. I also think with the data management, some of that's around teaching and learning might go to how we manage our students' needs. It might need to show up in both goals, right? One is a need-based for teaching and learning, and one is a technological base. And my only thing on this goal 7 is, are we limiting ourselves by saying improving technology, right? Because once you improve upon it, are you done? Or should it really be that you're ensuring robust technology? because that's a more enduring goal to me. And you're always kind of chasing that goal rather than improving. We could improve tomorrow and be like, oh, we satisfied, right? But I don't think that's what the intent of this goal. So those would be my 3 thoughts around this goal.
And I would just add on that, like, when I looked at this, I wanted to know, are we continually assessing the hardware that the district is using? And if there are ways to improve upon that, how does that tie into this specific goal? Because that aspect of technology is continually changing, and not to say that we should be continually changing our type of technology, but we should be continually assessing whether it is the most efficient and effective technology for the district.
I'm looking at 7B especially, but both 7A and 7B. And when we look at the networking infrastructure and the wires and the different routers and devices that are throughout the buildings, I know facilities has always looked at the actual buildings themselves, but we've dealt many times with the wiring and the HVAC and many of the other systems that are in the buildings. As we think about moving forward and who's going to look at this, it would seem we may want to, as a board, think about looking at the role of the facilities subcommittee as it exists, and maybe some of our traditional things as technology has evolved. Some of these discussions maybe properly belong in that subgroup to do a lot of this work in terms of facilities and systems and what the overall infrastructure is that gets built, the same way we would do the actual brick and mortar buildings. So in terms of next steps, I'm throwing that out there. That's what jumps to mind as I'm reviewing this.
Jill?
Because to all of the points made before, technology does underpin a lot of what we do. There was a debate at the steering committee about whether or not we should pull technology out as an isolated goal or not. And so some of these questions are very reasonable, and the board may decide that it doesn't want technology to sit as a goal the way that it does today. I think, for example, 7B could be a part of an efficient, if we broaden goal 5, 7B could be a part of an efficient system. So to that end, I think the overall question is, of course, technology underlies all of these things. Do you want it isolated as its own body of work, or do you want it embedded by function where it belongs? Again, the steering committee made the decision to pull it out because of its relative importance, both on a financial and a level of effort and impact scale.
So all of those statements are true, and I'll just add one in that the goal itself was reconfigured a number of times. Improvement may not be the actual descriptor we need, but there was a sense from my entry plan through all the discussions we had that there were areas in this area that we really did want to improve on. But that being said, all the comments the board have made are real and appropriate for this.
I personally do think it should be a separate goal, because over the past few months, we've seen how essential technology is, and to ensure that we have a robust system in place for our students. I think I would still want it to be a standalone goal.
So I would agree with Deb, and I'm assuming, Jill, since you are on this committee, that this should be a standalone goal. I think that technology is something we're learning about so quickly, and given COVID, its role in education is now probably forever changed. And so eventually it may dissipate between all other goal areas, but at this point, there's still so much learning to do and financial investment involved in it that I think it's probably important to get the goal right, but to have it as a standalone goal.
Jill? You're sorry, Jill, you have to unmute.
Thank you. This question applies to multiple goals, and Richard has heard me ask it before, as have a couple others, but I'd love to see us explicitly in this plan take some time to reflect on the learnings from COVID. I think we have learnings in technology, we have learnings in teaching and learning, and perhaps other places. And while I'm sure that's intended in all of the work the administration has set up for the next couple of years, I think it's so important that I'd love to see it recognized in this plan.
Anything else on goal 7? I don't see anybody's hands raised. So did we want to take a moment to just talk about next steps and someone mentioned a subcommittee, maybe that was Dr. Lemons, I can't remember who. But do we want the full board to see another round of this document? What is the view of the board in terms of the next step? John?
So I just wanted to give you my personal view on how I viewed today. And I was quiet because I was just absorbing more than, contributing, because it was our first read, as Mr. Brown pointed out. So, I'd love to use the next few weeks to reflect on this discussion, kind of look at it now with the perspective that was given by the members that sat on the strategic committee. I would suggest that, Dr. Adley, Chris and Dr. Lemons, look at this and our comments and kind of compile them if they could over that time frame. I kind of take a step back, and this is really important to Alan and Chris, this document, because that's going to guide them. We hired them to execute, and this is going to be our adopted plan, but this is a tool that they're going to use for years to come. So I'd love to come back to the next meeting with their strong recommendations around some of the comments that we made. And then we can all, I guess the last point I would make is maybe I suggest our subcommittee is those that sat on the strategic planning committee, and try to get down to the meaning of some of this. And then as a board, we would react to their changes and recommendations.
Tara?
So I agree with most of what John recommended there. I think Alan and Chris and Richard, if you could go back and kind of synthesize what we do. I do think that this has sat in subcommittees for a long time, and this is a decision of the board. And so I think we could go one of two ways. I think either we have another special meeting, because this really can't be embedded in a Tuesday night meeting or a budget meeting. It's just too much. And we do it as the 9 of us, because the 9 of us have to do this. Or I would suggest a committee that wasn't the steering committee, because they've sat with this for so long and the board needs eyes. I'm less inclined to go that way. I actually think at this point it's a the board as a committee should do this, with some, correlating what you guys heard today. But I think at some point, and please, I appreciate all the work that the strategic planning committee has come, but that wasn't a group we really put together. We assigned members to. So I think at this point, the 9 of us have to kind of wrap our hands around it. So I would either do it as, my first suggestion would be for the 9 of us to get back together as a special meeting with some, pulling together some of this information. But if we need a subcommittee, I would at least recommend that you have some new voices in there, because you're going to need the board to come to consensus on this.
So Tara, just to be clear, so we know what your view is really a special meeting. That is your preference?
My preference would be a special meeting with the 9 of us. And I know it's laborious during budget season, but I do think the 9 of us have to come to consensus on this. So we could have a committee report back to us, but it's just another step at this point.
Sorry, and I agree, Tara. I didn't verbalize it well. I just thought the 3 that had worked on the strategic plan could impart their opinions of some of the questions of the content, how it was derived, to Dr. Lemons and Dr. Adley to better inform them as they kind of develop some of the changes and modifications. But I agree. I think all 9 of us should get together for a special meeting.
Okay, so thank you. Katie?
Oh, hi. I agree that it should be the 9 of us. I'm wondering, for efficiency's sake, if it would be helpful for Richard, Allen, and maybe Chris to redline some of the areas where we've raised some questions and start the process of editing for us to review. It just gives us a launching pad to start discussions next time.
That's a great idea. Were you looking to have that in advance? So something?
Yes.
Okay, so something in advance of the next special
Yeah,
meeting.
just sort of synthesize our thoughts and maybe get us going so we can just sort of start at those places and see where we were and what you guys have synthesized from what we've said today.
Okay, so Katie, you're also in agreement with a special meeting of the full board. Okay, thank you. And Sarah? Oh, Dave, go ahead, Dave.
Sorry, I would also argue for a special meeting. I would argue against efficiency here, which is weird, but the reason for that is, as we have 5 to 10 years, this is going to be our guidepost, the administration. If we have to spend a few meetings, if we have to spend 5 or 6, I don't want to, but if we do, I think this is something people should get in and fight, and it's going to take a lot of time. We need to get this right. So I don't think this is something we can bang through in a meeting or a couple meetings. It may take longer, and I think that's an important consideration, that this should be something that's done in a thoughtful and perhaps drawn out process. So I just want to leap to get this done, just to get it done. People spend a year on this. It's going to guide for a long time, and I think we need to take the time and put that in as a board.
Okay, thanks, Dave. Sarah, Jill, do you?
Yeah, I would just agree that, going back to a subcommittee doesn't seem to make a whole lot of sense. It just adds another step. I think if we can all work as the 9 of us and have Chris and Alan and Dr. Lemons go back with what we've talked about today and, edit, revise, and then come back to us would be great.
Okay. Dennis and Jill, does that sound good to you? Okay, thank you.
Sounds great.
And Dr. Adley, yep.
I just wanted to make a comment. Thanks to Richard. I wish I could take this mask off now, because honestly, this work, I appreciate all of your feedback. This work's exciting to me because the big goals, the general areas that people have spent time on, the guiding documents themselves, mission, vision, goals. I'm excited about the opportunities that may provide the district, yourselves as a board, and ultimately to our children, because that provides for me, it provides a nice framework to continue the next level of work. So I just wanted to let you know I'm excited about that. I know we're in the details in the weeds this morning, but I appreciate that because we have to. But anyway, I want to appreciate your time and devotion to this, and I'm excited about what the end product will do, and actually the work that it will generate.
Yes, thank you, Dr. Lemons, and a big thank you to the Strategic Planning Committee for all their hard work bringing this document to the board. So we can move on to the next agenda item. Thank you, Dr. Lemons, for your time.
Thank you for all of your feedback. This is incredible for moving it forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. So the next agenda item is public comment.
Good morning. If you would like to speak during public comment, please click the participants icon on the bottom of your Zoom screen. Next, click the raise hand option. You will notice a blue hand icon appear in the upper corner of your screen where your face, name, number appears. When it is your turn to speak, the facilitator will identify you and announce that you're unmuted for public comment. Once recognized and unmuted, please state your name and address. You will have up to 3 minutes to comment. There are no raised hands at this time.
Okay, thank you. So can I have a motion to adjourn? John, seconded by Sarah. All in favor? That's unanimous. Thank you, everyone.
Happy holidays, everybody.
Happy holidays. Bye.
I want to make sure you